The frost had not yet lifted from the churchyard stones when the carriage stopped, where no carriage ever stopped. And the woman at the gate did not look up, because in 3 winters of kneeling at that gate, she had learned that looking up only invited the cut, and the cut was colder than the cold. She kept her eyes on the cracked flags beneath her knees. She kept her hands folded over the chipped wooden bowl that held 2 farthings and a button some child had given her in mistake for a coin. The bell of St. Aldhelm had just finished ringing the hour, and the worshippers were spilling out in their furs and their good wool, and they walked around her the way the river walks around a stone, parting and rejoining and never once touching. And she had grown so used to being water-parted that the sound of a boot stopping directly before her struck her as a kind of error. She did not raise her head. She had been told in 100 small ways what she was. A footman that morning had named it plainly to a friend, not troubling to lower his voice, as though she were a post or a railing. "There is the beggar at the gate," he had said. "The one who used to be somebody." The one who used to be somebody. That was the whole of her, now condensed to a phrase a stranger could carry off and forget by noon. The boot did not move. A second joined it. And then, against every law she understood of how the world was arranged, the man those boots belonged to lowered himself, slowly, with the deliberation of a tall person folding into a small space, until he was kneeling on the frozen stone before her, close enough that she could see the fine, dark weave of his coat and the white of his cravat, and the mud he had not minded gathering at his knee. The whole churchyard seemed to inhale at once. A woman gasped. A walking stick clattered. Somewhere a child asked a question and was hushed with a violence that was itself a kind of answer. The kneeling man said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and level, pitched for her, and not for the crowd. "Forgive me," he said. "I did not know you were alive." She looked up. Then she could not help it. And what she saw was a face she had spent 2 years teaching herself to forget, a face with a jaw set like something carved and eyes the gray of smoke over water, and she understood, with a lurch that started in her stomach and climbed to her throat, exactly who had knelt, and exactly why the churchyard had stopped breathing, and exactly how much further she now had to fall. You may wonder how a woman comes to kneel at a gate where she was once carried through in a sprung carriage with her name announced ahead of her. Stay with me. The fall was not sudden, and it was not deserved, and it began the way such falls usually begin, with a death and a signature and a man who believed the law had handed him what he wanted. Her name was Eleanor Vane, and 3 years before that frozen morning, she had been the only daughter of a country physician of good family and small fortune, a man more respected than rich, who had taught his daughter Latin she was not supposed to want, and medicine she was certainly not supposed to know. She had set bones at his side. She had stitched a plowman's hand by candlelight at 14 and not fainted. She had read his books on fever and contagion until the spines went soft. When the war took surgeons from the county faster than the county could spare them, she had gone with her father to the coast, where the transports unloaded the wounded. And there, in a requisitioned assembly room that smelled of tar and rot and lavender water uselessly sprinkled, she had done work that no drawing room would ever have permitted her to admit to. Her father died of the same fever he had crossed the county to fight, and he died owing money she had not known existed, borrowed against the house to pay for medicines he gave away. The house went to a cousin, a Mr. Ree Crail, who arrived with a solicitor and a list, and the particular gentleness of a man who has decided to be reasonable. He was very reasonable. He explained that the entail had always favored the male line, that he bore her no ill will, that she might, of course, remain as a kind of housekeeper if she found the new arrangement agreeable. He said the word housekeeper the way one sets down a cup, carefully watching to see if it would crack her. She did not crack. She thanked him, and asked for a week to settle her father's papers, and used the week to leave. What she had not understood, being young and proud and certain that competence was a currency the world accepted, was how few doors opened to a gentlewoman with no money, no protector, and a reputation for unwomanly knowledge. The families who might have taken her as a governess wanted references from the families she did not have. The apothecary who might have used her hands wanted a husband attached to them first. The winter came, and then another, and the small economies became large ones. And the large ones became the gate at St. Aldhelm, where at least the stone was even, and the vicar did not drive her off. This was the woman the footman called the one who used to be somebody. This was the woman before whom a duke now knelt in the frost. His name, though the county said it more often than it said its prayers, was Adrian Thornfield, the Duke of Wraxall, and he was the last man in the 3 nearest counties anyone expected to see on his knees. He had inherited 4 years past upon the death of his father, and within the same season had lost his younger brother to the war, and the 2 losses had closed over him like ice over a river, so that the man who emerged was correct in every observance and warm in none. He gave generously and visited no one. He attended where rank required and left early. The mothers of the season had long since stopped arranging their daughters in his path, not because they had given up, but because his coldness had acquired the quality of weather, something one dressed against rather than argued with. He had come to St. Aldhelm that morning for the simplest of reasons. It was the anniversary of his brother's death. His brother lay not in the great mausoleum at Wraxall, but here, in this country churchyard, because here was where the transport had brought him, and here was where he had died, and the Duke had never been able to bring himself to move the body, as though moving it would be a second loss. He had come to stand at the stone. He had not come to find a ghost kneeling at the gate. Yet he had recognized her at once, in the way one recognizes a face from a dream. One has had so many times the dream has worn a groove. He had seen that face bent over his brother in the assembly room on the coast, in the last days, when the fever had taken everyone the surgeons could spare and most they could not. He had ridden down upon hearing his brother was among the wounded, and he had arrived to find a girl in a plain stuff gown with her sleeves pinned back and her hands steady, doing for his brother what the exhausted surgeon could no longer do, cooling him, turning him, speaking to him in a low voice that did not lie and did not despair. His brother had died anyway. Nothing she did had been enough, because nothing anyone did was enough against that fever in that year. Yet the Duke had stood in the doorway and watched a stranger refuse to let his brother die alone. And he had carried the image so long that he had stopped believing it belonged to a living person. Now the living person knelt in the frost with a chipped bowl, and the greatest man in the county knelt before her, and the county did not know where to put its eyes. "Get up, my lady," someone said not unkindly. An older woman in good grey wool scandalized on the Duke's behalf. "You must not, your grace. It is not. She does not." And the sentence collapsed under the weight of everything it could not say. The Duke did not get up. He looked at Eleanor as though the crowd had ceased to exist, and he said, in the same low, level voice, "You held my brother's hand when he died." I have wanted 3 years to thank the woman who did that. I did not know she had come to this. Eleanor's hands tightened on the bowl. She was aware, with the terrible clarity that humiliation lends, of the patched elbow of her mantle and the worn heel of her shoe turned sideways beneath her and the redness of her knuckles, raw from the cold and from the work she took where she could find it, scrubbing steps before dawn for the price of bread. She was aware of being seen, wholly in the one condition she had spent every reserve of pride to keep from being seen in. And she was aware, beneath all of it, of a warmth climbing her face that had nothing to do with shame, a heat at the place where his eyes rested, and she despised her own body for it, for choosing this of all moments to remember it was alive. "I did what anyone would have done," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "It was not enough. It was everything," he said. And then he stood, finally, and the crowd loosed its held breath, and Eleanor thought that was the end of it. A strange story to be told at supper tables for a week, the day the Duke of Wraxall knelt to the beggar at the gate. She bent her head again and waited for the boots to walk away. They did not walk away. A gloved hand came into her downturned vision, palm up, open, waiting. "Come," he said, "you will not kneel here again." She should have refused. Every rule she had left, every shred of the pride that was the only inheritance her father's death had not taken, told her to refuse. A gentlewoman did not take a duke's hand at a churchyard gate before half the county. A gentlewoman did not climb into a duke's carriage. A gentlewoman, the dowager would shortly inform her, did anything but that. She took his hand. Afterward she could never fully explain it, except that she had been cold for 3 winters, and his hand was warm, and she was tired in a way that pride could no longer reach. The duke's mother had ruled Wraxall in his father's time, and had never entirely surrendered the habit. The Dowager Duchess of Wraxall was a woman of 70, who carried her age the way a fortress carries its years, as evidence of having outlasted every siege. She received the news of her son's arrival, and of the person he had brought with him, with a stillness that the housekeeper later described as worse than shouting. When Eleanor was shown into the green drawing-room, washed and given a clean gown that did not fit, and a chair by a fire whose warmth she did not trust, the dowager looked at her for a long moment over the top of a fan held precisely half an inch too high, and then turned to her son. "A charity case?" she said. "How like your brother you have become, Adrian. He was always bringing home wounded things." The word charity was placed on the air with great care, the way a chess piece is set down by a player who has seen 4 moves ahead. Eleanor felt it land. She had been called many things in 3 years, but charity, spoken in that room with that fire and that fan, did a particular work. It made her a thing that had been done, an act of the Duke's that reflected on the Duke, rather than a person in her own right. She understood the move, even as it was made. She had not survived 3 winters by being slow. "She is the daughter of Dr. Vane," the Duke said. "She nursed Henry on the coast." "Then she has my thanks," the dowager said smoothly, "and the matter is closed. A purse surely would discharge any debt." A purse, and a character, and a place found for her at a suitable distance. The fan moved, dismissing the air between them. "We do not, Adrian. Keep our gratitude in the green drawing-room." It was the rival who said it next. The dismissive thing, though she said it as a kindness, which made it worse. Lady Sophronia Carr had been at Wraxall a fortnight already, the daughter of the dowager's oldest friend, arranged in the house the way a vase is arranged on a mantel, beautiful and expensive and meant to be looked at. She was everything Eleanor was not, which is to say, she was everything the season agreed a duke should marry, and she had understood her purpose at Wraxall from the moment her trunks arrived. She crossed to Eleanor, now with a rustle of ice-blue silk, and took her raw hand in both of her smooth ones, and said with a sweetness that the whole room could hear, "You poor creature, to have fallen so far. We shall find you something useful to do. Something useful to do." The crowd of the room, such as it was, the dowager and the companion and the 2 cousins visiting from the north, settled at that, satisfied, the way a court settles when sentence has been pronounced in a form everyone can accept. Eleanor's pulse beat hard in her throat. She kept her face still. She had learned that too. "I am obliged to you," she said, "to all of them and none of them," and she meant not one word of it, and Lady Sophronia smiled as though she had been thanked. Yet the Duke had not moved through any of it, and Eleanor, watching him from beneath her lashes in the way the constrained learn to watch the great, saw something the others did not, because the others were watching the performance, and she was watching the man. She saw his hand resting on the back of his mother's chair, close, slowly until the knuckles whitened, and then deliberately open again. She saw the muscle move once at the hinge of his jaw. She saw him say nothing, which from a man of his rank in his own house was itself a kind of speech, and she could not read it because her wound would not let her. A man like that did not feel anything on her account. A man like that had knelt from guilt and would rise from duty, and the kindest thing she could do for her own sense was to expect nothing, because expectation was the one luxury she truly could not afford. What she did not yet know was that the Duke had spent 3 years unable to enter the green drawing-room without seeing the doorway on the coast, and that the sight of the woman from that doorway being called a charity case in his own home had done something to him he did not have words for and would not have used them if he had. He found her the next morning in the still room. She had not been able to sleep in the soft bed they gave her, had risen before light out of 3 years of habit, and had gone looking for the one kind of room in any great house she knew how to be useful in. The still room at Wraxall had not been properly kept, since the old housekeeper's eyes failed. Eleanor found the shelves in disorder, the dried herbs gone to dust in their jars, a child's chilblains being treated. She gathered from the cook's complaint with a salve that had turned. She was sleeves back and elbow deep in setting it right, grinding something in a mortar, when the Duke came to the door and stopped, exactly as he had stopped 3 years before, and watched a woman work who believed herself unobserved. She did not perform for an audience, because she did not know she had one. That was the thing he had not been able to forget, and could not now stop seeing. The same economy of motion. The same low murmur to the kitchen girl whose hands she was examining, telling her the chilblains would mend, that she must keep them dry, that the salve would sting, and then it would not. The girl who feared everyone in that house was not afraid of her. The Duke stood in the doorway and felt the ice over the river shift. "You should not be working," he said at last. Eleanor did not startle, though. Her pulse betrayed her. A quick, hard knock. She was certain he could not see, and was certain illogically that he could. She set down the pestle. Someone should, she said. The child would have had a burn on top of the chilblains by week's end. He came into the room. He was too large for it, a duke among the small domestic jars, and she was aware of exactly where he stood, without looking, the way one is aware of a fire in a cold room. "Eat something," he said, which was not a reply to anything she had said, and she understood that he had noticed she had not gone down to breakfast, and the noticing undid her more than any kindness phrased as kindness could have. "I am not hungry," she said. "You're thin enough that I can see otherwise," he said, and there was no gallantry in it, no softening, only the flat statement of a man who looked at things directly. And Eleanor felt the heat climb her face again, and hated it again, and turned back to her mortar so he would not see. "Sit down," he said. "I will have something sent." And then when she did not sit, in the same level voice, "Eleanor." It was the first time he had used her given name. She had not given him leave. No one had given him leave. He said it the way he might have laid down a card he had been holding all along, and the sound of it in his low voice went through her like the first warmth after frostbite, which is to say it hurt because the feeling returning always hurts more than the numbness. She sat down. She did not trust herself to do anything else. "If you are kind to me," she said, looking at the spoiled salve and not at him, "you must understand that I cannot pay for it. I have nothing to give you in return for kindness, and I have learned what it costs to take what one cannot repay." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You held my brother's hand. I have been 3 years in your debt and did not know your name." He paused. "The account," he said, "is not in the direction you imagine." She wanted to weep and did not. She had not wept at her father's grave, nor at the cousin's reasonable cruelty, nor at the gate in 3 winters, and she would not begin in a duke's still room over a sentence about an account. Yet the wanting was there, and he saw it, and he did the one thing she could have borne, which was to leave. He sent up bread and broth and a pot of tea by a footman, who had clearly been instructed not to linger, and Eleanor ate alone among the herb jars, and thought that she had been wrong about exactly one thing, which was that she had believed nothing in her was left to break. The dowager understood the danger faster than her son did. She had not ruled Wraxall through 2 reigns by failing to recognize when the order of a house was under threat, and the threat, she saw clearly, was not that her son pitied the woman. Pity could be managed. Pity wrote a check and felt better. The threat was that her son had begun to be at ease, and Adrian had not been at ease since they put Henry in the ground, and a mother knows the difference between the silence of grief and the silence of a man listening for a footstep. So the dowager did what such women do, which was to make the position untenable by making it visible. She announced a dinner. She invited the county, the same county that had watched the Duke kneel at the gate, and she arranged the table with the precision of a general arranging guns, and she placed Lady Sophronia at the Duke's right hand, and she had a place laid for Eleanor too, far down the table, near the salt, and in the seat, reserved by long custom for the poor relation everyone is too well bred to mention. It was a masterstroke. To exclude Eleanor would have been an insult the Duke would notice. To include her there, in that seat, in a made-over gown among women, in silk that had never been anyone else's, was to display her precisely as the dowager had named her on the first day, a charity case at the foot of the table. The county would do the rest, and the county obliged. The cut is a quiet weapon, and it was used quietly. A lady to Eleanor's left turned her shoulder a fraction and spoke only to the gentleman beyond. A question put to her was answered briefly by someone else, as though she had not spoken. Lady Sophronia, radiant at the Duke's right, told a story about a woman of her acquaintance who had fallen on hard times and had the poor taste to remind everyone of it. And the table laughed in the way tables laugh, when the joke is a person, and a gentleman near Eleanor said to his neighbor not quite quietly enough that he supposed the famous Beggar of St. Aldhelm cleaned up tolerably, all things considered, and that it was striking what soap and the Duke's charity could do. There it was, again. The label and its third dress, spoken now not in a private aside, nor reported by a footman, but laughed across a public table, the dismissal complete, the verdict sealed by the county that had pronounced it, the one who used to be somebody, the charity case, the famous beggar who cleaned up tolerably. Eleanor sat very still and looked at the candle flame in front of her and let it blur, and refused to let it fall. She did the only thing left to a person at the foot of a table that has decided what she is. She rose with no fuss, set her napkin beside her untouched plate, and said to the dowager, in a voice that carried no further than courtesy required, that she found herself unwell and begged to be excused. It was the dignified retreat of a creature who has understood that the field is lost. The dowager inclined her head with exquisite graciousness. "Of course, my dear. You must rest." The performance had reached its intended end. Eleanor walked the length of that table, under the eyes of the county, and out the great doors, and did not run until the corridor was dark. She was packing the small bundle she had arrived with, the only things in that house that were truly hers, when she found at the bottom of it, wrapped in a square of linen, she had not opened in 3 years, the thing she had carried out of the assembly room on the coast, and never been able to throw away. It was a length of regimental ribbon, faded now, the colors of Henry Thornfield's regiment that the dying man had pressed into her hand on his last clear morning and asked her to keep, because, he had said, "No one else will remember that I was anyone, and you have a face that remembers." She had kept it through every economy. She had begged at a gate with it sewn into the lining of her mantle rather than sell it for bread. She held it now in the dark, and understood that she had to give it back, that it belonged to the man whose brother it was, and that returning it would be the last act of the only self she still owned, the self that finished what it began. She did not leave that night. She meant to leave at dawn. The ribbon returned, her debt to the dead discharged, her pride salvaged from the wreck of the dinner. Yet the great houses keep their own hours, and word of the dinner had traveled below stairs and above, and the Duke, who had sat through the whole of his mother's performance with his jaw set like carved stone, and had not understood until Lady Sophronia's story why Eleanor's chair stood empty, came to understand it fully somewhere around midnight. When the kitchen girl, with a mending chilblains, who feared everyone but the woman who had healed her hands, crept up to tell his grace that the kind lady was crying in the still room and packing to go. He found her there at first light, the ribbon in her hand. "This is your brother's," she said. Before he could speak, she held it out across the spoiled and now half-mended shelves. "He asked me to keep it, because he was afraid of being forgotten. I have kept it 3 years. It is the last thing I have to return, and then I will be gone, and you will owe me nothing, and I will owe you nothing, and we shall both be free of an account that should never have been opened." The Duke looked at the ribbon. He did not take it. Something moved across his face that she had not seen there before, a crack running through the ice. And when he spoke, his voice was not quite level for the first time since she had known him. "He asked you to remember him," the Duke said slowly, as though each word were a stone he was laying with his own hands. "And you remembered him. For 3 years, with nothing, at a gate, in the cold you remembered my brother, when I, who had everything, could not so much as move his grave for fear of feeling it." He stopped. The hand that had whitened on his mother's chair the first day rose, and stopped and did not touch her, and hovered instead near the ribbon in her open palm. "I have been told my whole life what I owe and to whom," he said. "And debts of rank, debts of blood, debts of name. No one ever taught me what it is to owe someone the truth. So I will tell you the truth, Eleanor, once, because I do not know how to say it twice. I did not kneel at that gate from guilt. I knelt because when I saw your face, I felt for the first time in 3 years that I wished to live in the same world as the person it belonged to. That is what I owe you, not a purse, not a place at a suitable distance. That." The still room was very quiet. Somewhere below the house was waking, a pot set down, a door, a girl's voice. Eleanor stood with the ribbon held out between them and felt the whole architecture of her caution. 3 winters in the building begin to come down, and she was terrified because a structure that has held you up is frightening to lose, even when it is a prison. "I am a beggar from a churchyard gate," she said. Her voice shook. "The county has decided what I am. Your mother has decided. By the spring, the whole of England will have decided. You cannot want this." "I have wanted little for 3 years," he said. "I find I want this against every decision that has been made for me." He closed her fingers around the ribbon, gently, his hand over hers, the first deliberate touch, his palm warm and hers cold, and the ribbon pressed between. "Keep it," he said. He asked the right person. She did not weep then either, though it was a near thing. What she did was look up at him, fully, in the gray light, with her raw hand caught in his, and not look away, which from a woman who had taught herself for 3 years never to be the first to meet an eye, was the largest thing she had ever given anyone. Yet wanting a thing in a still room at dawn and keeping it against the world are different labors, and the world had not finished. The dowager moved at breakfast. She had her own intelligence, and she had heard that the woman had not, after all, departed, and she understood that the dinner had failed of its purpose, and so she chose the larger weapon, the one she had been holding in reserve. Mr. Marju Crail, she had learned, was in the neighborhood. The reasonable cousin who had taken Eleanor's house had business at the assizes, and the dowager, with the swiftness of a woman who knows exactly which lever to pull, sent a footman with a civil note inviting him to call, and let it be known, in the way such things are let known, that the woman her son had brought home was not merely a beggar, but a person of irregular reputation, a woman who had nursed soldiers among men, unmarried, with knowledge no respectable woman owned, and that her cousin and natural guardian might wish to remove her before the family name suffered further. The trap was laid for an assembly, 3 nights hence, a public ball at the county rooms, the very rooms where the season rendered its verdicts, where the Duke was expected to appear, and where the dowager intended the matter would be settled in front of everyone whose opinion the county valued. Mr. Crail would attend, Lady Sophronia would shine, and the beggar woman, if she were fool enough to come, would be exposed before the whole county as exactly what they had all agreed she was, and removed by her lawful guardian, and the order of the house would close over the disturbance like ice over a river, and Adrian would in time be grateful. Eleanor learned of it the way the powerless always learn of the plans made above them, in fragments, from a maid, from a silence at a door, from the particular brightness of Lady Sophronia's attention in the days before. She knew she should not go. She knew the rooms were a court, and she, the accused, and the verdict already written. And she knew, with the same clarity. That not going was its own kind of verdict. An admission, a flight, a confirmation that she was a thing to be removed and not a person who could stand in a public room and be looked at. She had taken his hand at the gate. She found she could not now take her hand from the only fight that mattered. She went to the assembly in the made-over gown alone, and the county rooms fell quiet in patches as she passed, the quiet spreading the way it had spread at the churchyard gate, and Mr. Bread. Crail detached himself from a knot of gentlemen with the reasonable expression of a man about to do an unpleasant duty, and the dowager watched from a gilt chair with her fan at its measured height, and Lady Sophronia stood near the Duke, in ice-blue silk, with the small smile of a woman watching a board on which she has already won. Mr. Crail reached Eleanor first. "Cousin," he said, loudly enough, with great gentleness, "this is no place for you. You are not well. Your situation is not—" he searched for the word as he had searched 3 years before, "suitable. Come away with me now, and we shall say no more of it, and you may return to a quiet life among people who understand you." He held out his arm. It was the same gesture the Duke had made at the gate, the open hand, the offered escort, and it was its perfect inversion. An arm offered to remove her from the world, rather than to lift her into it, and the whole room understood the difference, and held its breath to see which she would take. Eleanor looked at the offered arm. She looked at the dowager's fan. She looked at the county arranged around her like a jury. And she did the thing that 3 winters at a gate had taught her, which was to stand very still and tell the truth in a plain voice, and let it cost what it cost. "I nurse soldiers," she said clearly to the room, and not to Crail. "I set the bones of men your law would not let me dine beside. I held the hand of a dying man and kept my promise to him for 3 years, while I begged for bread, and I sold nothing of his, though selling it would have fed me. If that is unsuitable," she said, "then I do not know what the word is for, and I will not be removed from a room for having done what was needed when there was no one else to do it." It was not a long speech. It was over before the room had decided how to receive it, and into the silence after it, before Crail could take her arm, before the dowager could lift her fan. The Duke of Wraxall crossed the floor of the county rooms. He did not hurry. He crossed the length of that bright room at his own pace, past the rival in her ice-blue silk, past his mother in her gilt chair, past every face that had laughed at a dinner table 3 nights before, and the crowd parted before him the way the worshippers had parted around a kneeling woman, except that now the parting ran toward her instead of around. He stopped before Eleanor. He looked at Mr. Crail's offered arm, and then he looked at the room, and then he looked at her, and he held out his own hand, palm up, open. The same gesture as the gate, the same gesture exactly, completing it. Then he said, the thing he had not said before and would not say again, 12 words laid down in a room built for verdicts. In a voice the whole county heard. "This lady is to be my wife. Move your arm, sir." The room did not gasp. It went utterly silent, the silence of a verdict overturned by the only authority higher than the county's opinion of itself, which is the public and irrevocable word of the man the county had agreed to obey. Mr. Crail's arm came down. The dowager's fan stopped at its measured height and did not move, and then slowly lowered to her lap, and something in her face, watched by no one but Eleanor, who had learned to watch the great, gave way, not into cruelty defeated, but into something older and more tired, the recognition of a woman who has played a long game by rules that have, here, I'll end this room, stopped applying. Lady Sophronia's small smile remained fixed for one terrible moment too long, and then was put away neatly, the way she put away everything, and she inclined her head to Eleanor with a correctness that was its own white flag. Eleanor stood in the center of the room she had come to as the accused, with the county's eyes upon her and the Duke's hand open before her, and she understood that the thing being offered was not rescue. She had rescued herself, in the plain truth told, to a plain room. What was offered was the other thing, the thing she had stopped believing the world contained, for a woman like her. She put her raw hand into his warm one, before all of them, and the small, reckless gesture closed the circle the gate had opened. "You knelt to me," she said very low, so that only he could hear. "I will not make a habit of it," he said, and there was at last at the corner of his carved mouth the smallest movement of something almost like amusement, the first she had ever seen there. And from a man like that, in a room like that, it was as good as a shout. They were married before the spring, quietly at St. Aldhelm, in the church beside the gate, because Eleanor would have it nowhere else. The county came, because the county always comes when the verdict has been reversed, and was charming, because the county is always charming to the winner. The dowager attended in grey and said little, and in the months that followed said less, and one evening near Christmas, watching Eleanor settle a quarrel between the kitchen girl and the new still-room maid, with a fairness that admitted no appeal, the old woman remarked to no one in particular, which from the Dowager Duchess of Wraxall was a surrender with full honours. Taberet. Lady Sophronia married a viscount with a larger fortune within the year, and was by all accounts content, having understood that she had lost not a man, but a position, and that positions could be found elsewhere. The still-room at Wraxall became the best kept in 3 counties. Eleanor restored its shelves and its jars and its order, and the people of the village learned that they might come to the great house with a fever or a burn or a child gone blue in the night, and find the Duchess herself with her sleeves pinned back, and the strangeness of it wore off the way, until it was simply the way of the place. The Duchess who knew medicine, who had once begged at the gate, whom the Duke had knelt to, before anyone would look at her. On the first anniversary of the morning at the gate, the Duke and Duchess of Wraxall walked together through the churchyard of St. Aldhelm in a hard, bright winter light, and stopped at the stone where Henry Thornfield lay, the brother who had been afraid of being forgotten. The frost was on the stones again. The bell rang the hour as it had rung it then. Eleanor took from her reticule the length of faded regimental ribbon, the colours of his regiment, the thing she had carried out of the assembly room, and through 3 winters, and had never been able to throw away. And she knelt, this time by choice, on the frozen ground before the grave, and weighted it with a small, smooth pebble against the wind. "He asked the right person," the Duke said quietly. Beside her the same words he had spoken in the still room at dawn, and he put his hand down, palm up, open, in the gesture that was now the private language of the 2 of them, and she took it, and he raised her up out of the frost for the last time, because she would not kneel at that gate again. And from this winter on she never did. Behind them the carriage waited where no carriage had ever waited, and the wind moved in the bare trees, and the ribbon lay bright against the grey stone, remembered as its owner had asked to be. They walked back through the gate together, and the village going in to its prayers made way for them, parting and rejoining, the way the river parts around a stone, except that the stone was now 2, and walked, and the cold could not reach them any more. If Eleanor's winter at the gate moved you, stay a moment in the comments and tell me the line that stayed with you. Thank you for staying to the end.